Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the CrunchLabs Masters, which is part of the Chess Champions Tour being held on chess.com. Now, I am competing in this tournament. I'm currently in Division 2, but for today's video, we're going to be looking at 3 games that were played in Division 1. Now, the first game we're going to be taking a look at was played between Fabiano Caruana, the #2 player from the United States, #3 in the world, playing against Alireza, the #1 player from France, and a perennial top 10 player. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action. Now, before we get into that, I should say the games are 10 minutes with a 2-second increment, so it's a form of the very fast rapid. All right, so the game starts out with the move c4 from Fabiano. We get this move c6, knight f3, and now we have the move d5. Now here, Alireza is playing the classic Slav defense by pushing out these 2 pawns. Fabiano goes g3, and now we get the move bishop to g4 being played, and Fabiano plays knight e5. Here we have the move bishop to f5, and now we get this move queen to b3. Thus far, pretty standard. What Fabiano is aiming to do is he's trying to put pressure on the pawn on f7, but also pressure on the pawns on d5 and b7 as well. So here we get the move queen b6 from Alireza, and now Fabiano decides to take the pawn on d5. We get queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, and here Alireza goes for this move bishop e4. Now, you're probably thinking this is a very logical move. You attack the rook on h1, and after white moves the rook, now you take with the bishop. Classic wooden shield here in the middle of the board with the bishop on d5, and black is doing quite well. Unfortunately for Alireza, he's playing as Fabiano Caruana, who is probably the best prepared player in the world when it comes to opening theory, and this move is simply a mistake because Fabiano takes the pawn on c6, sacking the rook on the h1 square. Now, probably when Alireza saw this move, I didn't see the cams because I was playing my own match, but probably thought, wait, I just take the rook on h1, and after pawn takes pawn, I can simply move the bishop backwards, capture the pawn, and I've got an extra rook on the board. I'm going to win this game very easily and win the match, right? Well, not so fast, because after d takes c6 is played, Alireza doesn't look deep enough, and after he takes what looks like the free rook, using 2.5 minutes, here, Fabiano sacks the rook on a7. He goes for the double rook sacrifice, and Alireza resigns the game on the spot and loses the game in a mere 9 moves. Now, this is simply a stunning turn of events. The reason this is game over is that the rook on a8 is trapped. So basically, if you move a knight, I take the rook, I take the knight, and I win the game, right? If you play a move like knight takes c6, for example, takes and knight d8, once again, I can sack the rook with rook takes knight, and after takes, I fork the king and the rook, you move the king, I take the rook, and now white simply has 2 bishops and 2 knights versus 2 bishops and a knight. Black is missing a horsey and will lose the game. So, pretty obvious. Well, I didn't get to the main line. Now, the main reason this doesn't work is because if black takes the second rook, with rook takes a7 here, now white can push this pawn to c7, pushing p, and the game ends instantly. Black cannot avoid white promoting this pawn to a queen. In fact, you can't even stop the pawn from getting to c8, frankly, but it's over. If you play a move like e6, I take here, take the rook. Now white has a queen for, I think it's a rook. Actually, sorry, white has a queen and a bishop for a rook. Very simply, power overwhelming, and white wins the game. So, after rook takes a7, Alireza simply resigns the game on the spot. Fabiano gets a very, very nice win in this match. Now, Alireza would recover from this huge mistake in the opening to go on and win the match against Fabiano in Armageddon nonetheless, but it's really a shock anytime you see a game between 2 top-level players and anywhere within 20 moves. So to see Fabiano win in 9 moves with the double rook sacrifice is just out of this world. Spectacular. So huge win for Fabiano, and now we're going to start moving along around the horn. So the next game we're going to be taking a look at was also played in Division 1, or Division 2, I should say, between Vladimir Kramnik from Russia, the former world chess champion, and Frederick Swane. Now, because this game was played in Division 2, I was on the same Zoom call, and in the middle of this match, I don't know if it was after game 2 or game number 3, while I was playing against my opponent Bogdan Dayak, I heard Kramnik shout out very loudly. He said, "I demand a fair play investigation of my opponent." So Kramnik said this at that time, which for me, as I was playing my match, it was very clear that Kramnik had lost the game or something was going wrong. Now, nonetheless, Kramnik would claw back in this match and tie it 2-2 before the players would play in the Armageddon game. So in the Armageddon game, Kramnik playing with the white pieces, Frederick Swane playing with the black pieces, and if Frederick can draw the game, or basically just not lose the game, he will advance to the next stage. So the game starts with a move d4 from Kramnik. We get knight to f6, knight to f3, and now we have the move e6 being played, and Kramnik plays the move e3. Now Kramnik is a player who's played a lot of these systems, e3, b3, c4, etc. In his prime, he was very feared when he played these setups. In fact, I remember when I was much younger playing, I think it was in the Tal Memorial, he was playing these setups with great efficiency. So after e3, we got b6. Now we have the move bishop d3, bishop to b7 being played, and now Kramnik castles. After castles, we get the move d5, and now the move b3, intending to fianchetto the bishop to b2, but also play for c4 and try to take a little bit of the center. So Swane plays the move bishop to e7, we get the move bishop to b2, and now we have the move castles. Here, Kramnik plays the move c4, and now we get the move knight bd7, knight to c3, and c5. Now, this is more or less the end of the opening phase of the game. Both sides have built their big centers. The pawns are on c4, d4, d5, c5. It's the classic block structure. And now it becomes a lot about maneuvering and the piece placement. So we get queen e2, takes, 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 and now the move rook to e8. The logical reasoning behind rook e8 here is that black wants to put something on f8. He might want to put the bishop on f8 or move the knight to f8 and go to g6. One of the biggest points of putting the knight on g6 here is just to illustrate it, is that in this position, if you get the knight to g6, it blunts the threat to the light square b on the diagonal, and you also threaten to jump to f4 to fork the queen, the bishop, and the pawn. So rook e8, a very practical move, and now we get to move rook a d1. Now keep in mind, according to the computer, rook to e8 is a slight inaccuracy. Remember what I just said, because we will be coming back to this a little bit later on. So we get the move rook a d1 being played here, and now we have the move knight to f8 from Frederick, intending to put the knight on g6, but also trying to pressure the pawn on d4. Now we get the move knight to e5, and now we have the move knight g6 being played. Here, Kramnik plays the move queen to e3, stopping knight to f4, but also guarding the pawn on d4 at the same time. Game continues with queen c7, and now we get f4, Kramnik trying to overprotect this horse on e5 with the two pawns. Frederick plays rook a d8, another very logical move, trying to put pressure on the pawn on d4. Now, according to computer, this is also an inaccuracy. The best move is apparently to play the move a6, but Frederick plays like a human, and he plays rook a d8. Logical move, bring the rook to the center of the board. Now we get to move king to h1 from Kramnik. Not a necessary move. In fact, this is a slight mistake, but probably he was worried about tactics. If he plays a move like h3, he probably thought rook takes pawn, sacking the rook was a good idea. But if you do this, you do not take the rook, allowing bishop c5, which wins the queen. Instead, you go knight to b5, forking the queen and the rook at the same time. So we have king to h1 being played here, and now Frederick starts jumping all over Kramnik. He plays the move bishop to b4. We get knight to e2, and now this move knight to h4, bringing the knight to the edge of the board. Now, once again, keep in mind that according to the computer, the best move was to play knight h4 immediately. But we get the other order with bishop b4, knight e2, and now we have knight to h4, black trying to use the scope on the long diagonal and go after the white pawn and the white king. Here, Kramnik plays rook to f2, and now we get the move knight to f5, a very nice move targeting the queen on e3. Kramnik goes queen h3, trying to put pressure on this diagonal, trying to attack the black king. Here we have knight to e4, and now we get the move rook to f1, and Frederick plays this move knight d2. Now, this is a clear mistake according to the computer, because as Kramnik correctly responds, he sacks the rook for the knight on d2, and after takes, he plays this move d5. Now, the computer gives white a big advantage in this position. I think with more depth, it's even going to jump a little bit more than it does, but at this point, white is doing very well and should be clearly better, as you can tell from the eval bar. Now, Frederick here plays a move that I absolutely love, which is this move b5. This is not the best move to keep in mind. It's a clear mistake according to the engine. Computer preferred the move f6, trying to attack the knight, and after knight g4, bishop c8, black is apparently okay. So, in this position, after d5, Frederick plays b5. Kramnik correctly plays the move knight to d4, bringing the knight here, trying to create massive pressure on the double diagonals here. It looks like Kramnik is on his way to a win. However, keep in mind, this is a blitz game here. It's our Megadon, and in such situations without a lot of time on the clock, sometimes it can be very hard to play super precisely. So Frederick plays pawn takes pawn, only move here because white is trying to massacre you on the king side. Also, you really need to open up this file or this diagonal for the b. So we get pawn takes pawn. And here Kramnik spends quite a bit of time before playing this move pawn takes pawn, and this is a clear blunder. According to the computer, if Kramnik were to play knight takes pawn here, attacking the b, the best line for black is to play rook takes pawn, knight takes bishop. If you were to take here, by the way, white can simply take, and maybe it's not checkmate here, but it's going to be very, very bad here with this massive pin, all these threats towards the king, and you will lose the game. So Kramnik spends a bunch of time. Actually, what I should say is just to show the whole line here, why this is good for white. This, I think it's supposed to be g6, knight b3, and rook d8, and white is supposed to be a little bit better in this position. Something along these lines. Maybe I've got the order wrong. Maybe after after g6, there's knight e4. So I think you're supposed to go rook d8 first, and then force knight b3, and then go g6 to get the actual situation. But white is still a little bit better. Instead, Kramnik spends almost 2 minutes here playing the move pawn takes pawn, and this move loses the game on the spot because now Frederick's moves simply become too easy. Frederick has played a relatively good game so far, but now he's in a situation where he has only moves which are literally very obvious and the only move to not lose the game, and he starts finding them in spades. So he takes the pawn on e6, and here Kramnik goes for the move knight takes knight. Now, computer says that after knight takes c4, bishop takes f4. I mean, maybe you're still... Actually, I don't know what you're even playing for because black's king is very safe here. Diagonals are open, and the rooks are actually also on the 2 open lanes. So probably it's just lost, and therefore Kramnik decides to play knight takes knight. After knight takes knight, we get this move pawn takes bishop here for Frederick, and now with the light square be eliminated, even though you have D's knights on f5 and e5, there simply are no threats towards the black king, and Kramnik is losing the game. So Kramnik plays knight to h6, sacking the knight, throwing more fuel on the fire, but at the end of the day, he's running out of artillery and ammunition, much like the Russian army in Ukraine. So we get the move f5 being played here by Kramnik, and now Frederick plays pawn takes pawn, and we get this move rook takes pawn and f5 being played. After rook takes pawn, we get the move bishop g5 being played here, which covers the black king on g8 here. And now with the rooks on the e and the d files, black pushing this d pawn up the board, the game is simply over. White will lose. So Kramnik plays queen g3 here. Actually, one line I do want to show you guys, if instead of f5, white goes queen g3 check, you can simply play queen to g7, blocking the threats on the file, and after takes knight c4, let's just say king f7, knight d2, and rook c8, black is going to infiltrate on the c file, and at this point, black will win the game. So we get bishop g5, queen g3. Now we have d2 from Frederick going for the second queen and trying to immortalize himself by ice skatering Kramnik's king. So we get h4, Frederick promotes the pawn, we get king to h2, and now he plays a very sane move, queen to e2. Now, this move is a great move because when we look at the material here, Frederick has 2 queens, 2 rooks, 2 bishops. White has a queen, rook, knight, bishop. White is running out of ammunition. White does not have enough ammunition to win the game. So if you can simply trade down, get some pieces off the board, you will win. So queen 2 is a fantastic move with the idea of if white were to take, just trade everything off here, and black now has a queen and 2 rooks versus a rook, knight, and bishop, and it's game over. So after queen e2, Kramnik plays the move rook to f2, and now Frederick sacks the queen with queen takes knight. And just like yesterday, when Kramnik got to a losing position in the Armageddon game against Mikhail Antipov in the initial qualification stage, Kramnik simply lets his time run out. He has 2 minutes and 56 seconds on the clock here, and he lets his time run out. A pure sign of disrespect from Kramnik, showing once again that he simply has no regard for the game of chess. Now, the reason I bring this up is because as soon as the game did end, Kramnik immediately went to Twitter. He started posting stats of Frederick Swane. He made a video. He accused him of cheating. And there really is simply no place for this in modern day chess. It's very clear that these players are not cheating. These are strong grandmasters who are simply trying to make a living playing the game. And I will add additionally, I find it extremely disappointing that top players are not speaking up on this issue, that they're letting it fester and become much more of a sensationalized story than it should be. So at any rate, Frederick gets the win. I think he played a very, very good match. He was not cheating in this match. I'm going to be very, very clear on that. I feel really bad for him to have to deal with all this nonsense on the internet that's going on. And really not having a good way to defend himself, but he should hold his head high because he played a good match. He got a win against a former world champion, and he showed that he's a very good chess player. So big shout out to Frederick Svane for winning this game against Kramnik and winning the match. And I mean, I really do hope that he can move past this and that more people will speak up on the issue. So let's move on. Next game is the third and final game we're going to be taking a look at, and this was also, or not also, this was a game played in Division 1 between Jan Nepomniachtchi, the runner-up for the World Championship twice, once against Ding, but also against Magnus Carlsen, who is playing in this match. So this game featuring Jan and Magnus in Division 1. At this point, Magnus up 1-0 in the match, and Jan playing the second game with the white pieces. So we have the move c4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight 6. This is a classic English opening. We have the move g3, and Magnus plays d5. After takes bishop g2, we now have the open English. We're covering Levy Rosman's games in the recent event in New York, 1000 GM Invitational. There was a game where Megan Lee played knight b6 against Levy, but Magnus is a new age kid. He studies a lot of theory, and he plays this move knight to f6. Now, this isn't a super new line, but it is still new-ish, and there are a lot of avenues which you can explore within the opening. So we got this move, we got bishop c5 first, queen c2, and then knight f6. My bad, wrong order. But nonetheless, I think you guys get the point. After knight f6, we got this move a3. Now we have knight to d4 being played by Magnus. You can put the bishop on d6. You can also play for a5 in this position. But these situations where you put this knight on f6 are actually quite rare in general. So we get knight to d4 being played. We have knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and now we get the move castles, and e3 being played. Bro fumbled. We're doing this live for anybody who's going to watch this on YouTube. Yes, nonetheless, it's very similar because I do believe out of knight f6 order, you can get this exact same position with castles, bishop c5, queen c2, and knight d4 for anybody who's wondering. So, back to the game. Castles, Nepo plays b4, and now Magnus plays the move c6, trying to blunt the threats of the light square b and developing the light square bishop towards the g4 square. We get the move bishop b2, and now Magnus plays rook e8, simply developing the rook, guarding the pawn on e5. We have e3, bishop b6, and now the move knight a4 being played, and it's very clear here why Magnus put the rook on e8, as it guards the pawn on e5. Magnus plays bishop to g4, we get knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight, and at this point Nepo is looking to be in great shape. He has the two B's on two open diagonals, the classic X formation. He can play for d4 or f4 in this position, and it's looking really good. So surely Nepo will win this game, right? Right or not? Well, he is playing Magnus after all, who wins all the time. So Nepo plays f4 here, trying to open up the f file, rip open this long diagonal, and it's looking pretty good. But Magnus is not the greatest player in the world without reason. So he plays the move bishop e2, and now we get the move f takes e5 being played by Jan here, trying to open up the f file and pay homage to the great YouTube streamer and simply a much better chess player than Jan Nepomucci, Levy Rosman. So we get pawn takes pawn. We have bishop takes rook being played, so now Nepo has sacked the rook, and Nepo has a great rook on the f file. He also has the two B's here, and it looks very, very menacing. So we get the move knight to g4 being played by Magnus, trying to pressure the pawn at e5, and this is one of the things that makes Magnus simply the greatest player in the world, which is that Magnus, optically looks bad, but Magnus, no matter how bad a position looks, he still will find very good moves. He does not get influenced by what he thinks is going on in position. He keeps that objectivity. So we get knight to g4, and now queen f5 played here by Nepo. Simply a clean blunder here. Nepo uses 2 minutes before playing it. Computer wants to move bishop to e4, targeting the pawn on h7, because if you go g6, now there's e6, and suddenly the diagonals open up. White is going to line up a double A battery here with queen c3, and after f6 and a move like I think bishop c2, or maybe bishop b1's better, I don't know the difference. This starts to look very much like an alpha 0 game where you start using the two B's to crush on the long diagonals. Like say king g7, bishop a2. Look at these two B's. The two B's, the pressure on the pawn, and this really does look very good. So, after knight g4, Nepo instead plays move queen to f5, and now Magnus correctly takes the free juicer on d2, realizing that if Nepo takes on f7 here, after the move king to h8 is played, there simply are no ice skaters. The rook cover the squares, and this e3 pawn is collapsing, and their forks, and your white king on g1 is under pressure, and white simply is going to lose the game. So, Nepo plays the move bishop to c1, Magnus goes queen to e2. Important move, by the way, because the knight is under attack. You can't take on e3 either. But after queen to e2 here, guarding the knight, now Magnus is completely in the driver's seat. So we get queen takes pawn, king h8, e4 played, and after knight takes e5, it's very clear that white now is a very passive light square b. Diagonal is shut, and Magnus will win the game. So we get queen takes pawn, rook a d8 played, trying to use the tower on the open lane here, go to d1, create a kebab on the back rank. We get bishop f4, rook d1 played, another superb move from Magnus. Bishop takes knight, we get queen e3, again, more precision here. And after king h1, Magnus trades the towers, takes the pawn on e4, checking the king and winning the bishop. He does not take this bishop, because after queen to b8, we would get the classic ice skater checkmate with the king on h8 simply having no squares available. So, Magnus takes on e4, we get king g1, takes, queen c6, rook f8 here. White does have a bishop and a pawn in return for the rook, but due to the weak white king on g1, the open f file, queen e1, queen a1 ideas, queen d4, queen e3, white cannot defend. So after king g2, we get queen b2, king h3 played, hoping that Magnus will take the rook, but the greatest player in the world will obviously not do that. We get queen a3, queen b6, queen f3 played, and now Nepo goes bishop a6. In this position, Magnus plays h6. Very quiet move, creating the classic Lufthansa for the king on h7 so that there are no ice skaters. And now you can start to attack with the rook as well. We get to move queen g6, and now we have rook f6, queen e8, king h7, and Nepo goes bishop e2. Now, computer thinks that after bishop c4, white's apparently not completely lost. I guess after queen f5, king g2, queen c2, and queen e2, white is only very slightly worse. But I suspect at this point, with Nepo having lost the first game and just being worse, he probably simply was not remaining objective here, and he was just making moves quickly. So we get bishop e2. Magnus plays queen f5. We get to move king g2. And now queen to d5 check is played. We get king to h3. And Magnus infiltrates with rook f2, creating the kebab. All kinds of threats now on the second rank. The fifth rank as well. The white king is simply out to lunch. So after bishop h5 is played here by Nepo, we get queen to f5, bishop g4. Now we have queen c2, a very nice geometrical move. You cover the checks on e4 and f5 with the queen, and you hit the pawn on h2. At this point, Nepo can simply resign. Nepo was bishop e6, and after rook h2, king g4, Magnus plays the move queen to e4, checkmating Nepo's king on the g file, and that is all she wrote. So, very, very impressive win for Magnus. Again, showing why he's such a great player, or the greatest player, I should say. He gets a win, moves up 2-0 in the match. Magnus would win the third game as well. He obliterates Nepo with a clean 3-0 sweep in the rapid games, and he stays in the winner's bracket. So, a lot of exciting games, a lot of exciting matches. I hope you guys did enjoy this recap from the CrunchLabs Masters being held on chess.com, which is part of the Chess Champions Tour. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back soon with some more great recaps for YouTube. See you guys. Bye.